You just ask the same questions every week. How's your job? Our negative thoughts.
It's so awful, isn't it?
Joker. These are comprehensive analyses and explanations. The film Joker, directed by Todd Phillips, is a stark and unsettling psychological character study that reimagines the iconic villain's origin not as a tale of chemical transformation, but as a slow-burn sociological and mental health tragedy. Set in a grimy, early 1980s Gotham City rife with class war, social decay, and rat-infested streets, the film deliberately evokes the gritty cinema of Martin Scorsese, particularly Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, to ground its descent into madness in a palpable, bleak reality. Arthur Fleck's journey begins not with a grand ambition for chaos, but with a profound and pathetic desire for connection and recognition. His job as a sign-spinning clown, his aspiration to be a stand-up comedian, and his idolization of talk show host Murray Franklin all point to a man desperately seeking validation from a world that views him as invisible or, worse, a freak. This foundational longing is the engine of the narrative. Every rejection actively dismantles his already fragile psyche. A critical layer of Arthur's suffering is his pseudobulbar effect, a neurological condition causing inappropriate, uncontrollable laughter. This is not a quirk, but a central metaphor for his existential plight. His internal anguish is perpetually misinterpreted as joviality or creepiness by the outside world. The condition physically manifests the film's core theme: the agonizing gap between internal experience and external perception. The film's narrative is meticulously structured as a series of stripping away. Arthur's supports, however flimsy, are systematically removed. His social services, therapy, and medication are cut due to city budget cuts, a direct indictment of systemic failure. His employment is terminated after a gun falls from his clown costume. Though the gun was given to him by a co-worker purportedly for protection, a gesture later revealed to be a setup for ridicule. The subway shooting of 3 Wall Street bankers is the pivotal, transformative event. While framed initially as a panicked response to a brutal beating, the act is cathartic for Arthur. It is his first experience of agency in a life defined by powerlessness. The violence is not celebrated by the film, but presented with a terrifying, chaotic realism. The aftermath is where the film's social commentary intensifies, as the unknown killer is adopted as a symbol by the burgeoning anti-rich clown movement. Arthur's relationship with his mother, Penny, is the core of his personal trauma. Her delusional belief that Thomas Wayne is Arthur's father and will someday rescue them provides Arthur with a fragile hope. The revelation that this is a complete fiction, that he was adopted, severely abused, and that his mother allowed or caused his childhood brain injury, is the psychological death of Arthur Fleck. This truth annihilates his past, his identity, and his last tether to a normative reality. Following this, the film introduces its most brilliant and heartbreaking narrative sleight of hand. The entire romantic subplot with his neighbor Sophie is revealed to be an elaborate fantasy. This revelation forces a reevaluation of everything seen prior. It underscores Arthur's profound loneliness and the depth of his dissociation, blurring the line between his delusions and the film's reality, implicating the viewer in his subjective experience. The murder of his mother is thus not just matricide, but the killing of the primary architect of his false narrative. It is an act of psychic self-defense. He then kills his former coworker Randall, who betrayed him, solidifying his new path. These acts are methodical, representing the shedding of personal betrayals rather than ideological statements. The climactic appearance on Live with Murray Franklin is the birth of the Joker as a fully realized persona. Arthur prepares not as a desperate guest seeking forgiveness, but as a performer ready for his debut. His confession to the subway murders is delivered with a chilling, defiant pride. His statement, "I used to think that my life was a tragedy, but now I realize it's a fucking comedy," marks the complete inversion of his worldview. He has traded the victimhood of the tragic figure for the agency of the chaotic trickster. Murray's murder on live television is the final, irrevocable break. It is an act of patricide against a symbolic father figure who offered admiration and then ridicule. This televised act transforms Arthur from a lone killer into a catalyst. His arrest, watched by a city in revolt, cements his iconic status. The riots, with countless citizens in clown masks, validate his core belief that his experience of societal absurdity and rage is universal. He becomes a face for the faceless, albeit unintentionally. Joaquin Phoenix's performance is a monumental feat of physical and psychological embodiment. His emaciated frame, the haunting choreography of his dancing, and the terrifying control of his involuntary laughter create a character that is both pitiable and monstrous. The now iconic bathroom dance following the subway shootings is a key moment of transformation, where pain and horror morph into a grotesque, liberated expression of self. Cinematographically, the film uses a desaturated, gritty palette with moments of stark color, often in Arthur's fantasies or in the red of blood, punctuating the gloom. Hildur Guðnadóttir's cello-driven score is less a companion piece and more the sonic manifestation of Arthur's creeping dread and burgeoning madness, a character in its own right that swells with his internal state. Thematically, the film is a potent critique of societal abandonment. It poses difficult questions about where societal responsibility ends and personal accountability begins. Arthur is unequivocally a villain by the end, but the film challenges the audience to consider the ecosystem that created him. The wealthy, represented by Thomas Wayne, are portrayed as callous and out of touch, dismissing the poor as clowns and fueling the very resentment that consumes the city. The cultural impact of Joker was as volatile as its protagonist. It sparked intense debates about the potential glamorization of lone wolf violence, the representation of mental illness, and its resonance with disaffected, often male, subcultures. It was simultaneously hailed as a daring art house film disguised as a blockbuster and criticized as a hollow provocation wearing the cloak of social commentary. Its legacy is that of a boundary pusher. It proved that a comic book property could be a serious, Oscar-winning vehicle for exploring trauma, class, and identity without relying on superhero action. The announced sequel, Joker, Folie à Deux, promising a musical thriller format with Harley Quinn, suggests an intention to further explore Arthur's psyche from within his own distorted, performative reality. In final analysis, Joker succeeds as a chilling portrait of the making of a nihilist. It maps the precise coordinates where severe personal trauma intersects with systemic neglect and social hostility, resulting in an explosion of identity. Arthur Fleck does not fall into a vat of chemicals. He is slowly dissolved in the acid of indifference and cruelty, only to crystallize into the Joker, a figure for whom the world's cruel joke is the only truth and laughter, whether forced or genuine, is the only possible response. The film's power lies in its relentless focus on subjective experience, forcing the audience to occupy the deteriorating mind of Arthur Fleck. Gotham City is not merely a backdrop, but an active antagonist, a pressure cooker of garbage strikes, rampant crime, and palpable civic despair that mirrors Arthur's internal rot. Every element of the production design, from the sickly yellows of his apartment to the cold blues of the talk show set, is curated to reflect stages of his psychological journey. Arthur's profession as a clown is a layered metaphor, representing the masked society forces upon the marginalized, the performative happiness expected of the mentally ill, and the grotesque facade he will later weaponize. His makeup, initially applied carefully for work, becomes progressively smeared and distorted, visually charting his surrender to chaos. The transformation is not into a criminal mastermind, but into an avatar of anarchy who finds his purpose in the accidental resonance of his violent acts with the city's simmering rage. The relationship with his mother, Penny, is dissected through a lens of complex trauma. Her delusions of a connection to Thomas Wayne provided a fragile mythology that gave Arthur's suffering a narrative of eventual salvation. The revelation scene in Arkham State Hospital is the film's true horror core, where Arthur learns he was not only adopted but tortured and neglected, his brain injury and condition likely stemming from this abuse. This shatters the last vestige of a coherent self. His subsequent act of suffocating Penny is thus framed not as a simple murder, but as a symbolic severing of the umbilical cord to a false past. It is the necessary destruction of the primary source of his foundational lies. This act of matricide is executed with a terrifying, quiet solemnity, a dark rite of passage into a self-authored existence. He then visits Thomas Wayne in a bathroom, seeking not money but confirmation, a final paternal acknowledgement that is violently denied, cementing his total orphanhood. The film's masterful use of ambiguity, particularly regarding the reality of his relationship with Sophie, is a narrative gambit that pays profound dividends. The realization that their entire connection was a fabrication forces a retrospective reevaluation of his loneliness. It underscores that his fantasies are not escapism, but a debilitating symptom, a constructed reality where he is seen, loved, and normal. The moment she recoils from him in the hallway is the death of that illusion. This blurring between fantasy and reality extends to the film's climax. The audience is left to ponder the veracity of his appearance on Murray Franklin's show. Is the cheering crowd before his arrest another fantasy, or the real culmination of the riot? The film suggests that for the newly born Joker, this distinction is meaningless. Perception has wholly superseded objective reality. His experience is his only truth. Joaquin Phoenix's physical commitment transcends performance to become a form of embodiment. His emaciated physique, with visible vertebrae and protruding ribs, speaks of a body wasting away from neglect and psychological torment. His dance movements, particularly the slow-motion ascent of the concrete stairs after the subway shooting, are choreographies of a psyche unraveling and then reconstituting itself under a new, chaotic principle. The score by Hildur Gunnadr functions as Arthur's internal soundscape. The haunting, minimalist cello motifs are not traditional film music, but auditory manifestations of his anxiety, his longing, and his burgeoning rage. Gunnadr famously composed the themes before filming began, and Phoenix is said to have listened to them to find the character's rhythm, making the music a generative force in the film's creation. Societally, the film engages in a brutal critique of austerity and the abandonment of public health. The early scene where his social worker mechanically notes the cutting of his therapy and medication is a quiet indictment of a system designed to manage, not heal. His famous journal entry, "The worst part about having a mental illness is people expect you to behave as if you don't," becomes the film's tragic thesis statement. Class resentment is visualized through stark contrasts. The opulence of the Wayne mansion and the cold elegance of the Thomas Wayne campaign are juxtaposed with Arthur's squalid apartment, the bleak social services office, and the violent disorder of the subway. The wealthy are portrayed as utterly contemptuous of the poor, with Thomas Wayne dismissing the protesters as clowns and potential criminals, thus ironically naming the movement that will consume the city. Arthur's violence is never portrayed as heroic or even competent. The subway shooting is messy, panicked, and loud. The killings of Randall and Murray are intimate, brutal, and emotionally charged. The film avoids slick action choreography, ensuring each violent act carries weight and consequence, emphasizing they are eruptions of personal pathology rather than political strategy. Yet, the film explores how personal pathology can be misinterpreted as political symbol. Arthur has no ideology. He seeks connection, then revenge. The clown mask protesters project their own grievances onto his anonymous act, creating a folk hero. This disconnect highlights how movements can co-opt symbols without understanding their source, and how society often confuses symptoms for causes. The final riot sequence is a catharsis of societal ID. The burning police cars, the vandalism, and the violent clash with police represent the release of pent-up collective fury that Arthur, now the Joker, has inadvertently sparked. His blood-smeared smile, viewed from the wreckage of a police car, completes his iconography. He is no longer a man but a symbol, crowned by the chaos he inspired. The film's ending is deliberately, brilliantly ambiguous. Is the scene in the asylum another fantasy, a final imagining of triumph and connection with the Doctor? Or is it reality, with Arthur having crafted a new foundational myth for himself, finding genuine joy in his infamy and the chaos he wrought? The final shot of his bloody footprints leaving the frame suggests an ongoing story, a virus released into the world. Critically, the film ignited a firestorm of debate precisely because it refuses to moralize or provide easy answers. Some critics accused it of a potentially dangerous glamorization of the lone, alienated gunman, fearing it could serve as a template for the very resentment it depicts. Others praised its unflinching look at the roots of alienation and its bold, artistic ambition within the comic book genre. The film's aesthetic is a deliberate homage to 1970s New Hollywood cinema. The gritty texture, the slow-burn pacing, the focus on a troubled protagonist's interiority, and even the casting of Robert De Niro, star of Taxi Driver and the King of Comedy, in the Jerry Lewis role, all anchor the film in a tradition of social realism and psychological discomfort rather than superhero spectacle. Arthur's laugh is one of the film's most complex tools. It is a physiological symptom, a social shield, a signal of distress, and ultimately a weapon of defiance. The evolution of the laugh throughout the film tracks his transformation. From a painful, humiliating spasm to the forced, performative laugh on Murray's show, to the final, genuine, and terrifying laughter in the asylum, which is now fully integrated into his being. The theme of performance is central. Arthur performs normality, performs comedy, performs for his mother, and performs for his fantasy of Sophie. The Joker is his ultimate, authentic performance, one where the mask and the face become indistinguishable. His life becomes his act, and his violence becomes his punchline, inverting his earlier failure as a comedian. The film also explores failed paternalism. Arthur seeks father figures in Murray Franklin, Thomas Wayne, and even in his co-worker Gary, who shows him kindness. Each fails him, rejects him, or betrays him. This cumulative rejection fuels his nihilistic conclusion that no authority or structure is worthy of respect, that the entire social contract is a cruel joke played on the weak. The use of music within the diegesis, like Frank Sinatra's That's Life, is bitterly ironic. The lyrics about being knocked down and getting back up mock Arthur's inability to do so, until he reinterprets the sentiment through his violent rebirth. Similarly, the use of Send in the Clowns during the riot sequence creates a surreal, tragicomic atmosphere that encapsulates the film's tone. From a psychoanalytic perspective, Arthur represents the return of the repressed on a societal scale. His trauma, and the trauma of Gotham's underclass, violently erupts into the polished world of the powerful. The Joker is the idea of the city, a figure of pure, amoral drive unleashed, laughing at the superego's rules and structures. The film's color theory is meticulous. Arthur is often associated with sickly greens and yellows, colors of illness and decay. Red, the color of blood and passion, becomes more prominent as he embraces violence. Blue, a cold, detached color, dominates the world of authority figures like Murray and the talk show, until Arthur invades and corrupts that space with his vibrant, chaotic energy. His apartment is a physical manifestation of his mind. Cramped, decaying, filled with the detritus of his mother's delusions and his own arrested development. The long, haunting shots of him moving through its narrow spaces emphasize his entrapment. The transformation is marked by his physical departure from this space, culminating in the riot, which is a form of liberation into the wider, chaotic city. The character's relationship with time is fractured. He is stuck in the childhood trauma of his abuse, evidenced by his childlike demeanor and fantasy life. His transformation involves a violent forcing of himself into the present moment, claiming his existence through acts that demand the world acknowledge him now, culminating in the live broadcast of his final statement. The film questions the nature of comedy and tragedy. Arthur's life, viewed from the outside, is a tragedy of abuse and mental illness. From his new perspective as the Joker, it becomes a comedy of cosmic absurdity, where the punchline is the fragility of social order and the hypocrisy of civilized society. His stand-up routine, painfully unfunny, is the tragedy. His chaotic actions, which make the city laugh and burn, are his successful comedy. Murray Franklin represents the ultimate gatekeeper of legitimacy. His show is a symbol of mainstream acceptance and success, the very thing Arthur craves. By killing Murray on his own stage, Arthur destroys that gatekeeper and redefines success on his own terms. Infamy over fame, chaos over order, authenticity over performance, even as it is the ultimate performance. The clown masks worn by the rioters are a powerful symbol of de-individuation and the anonymity of modern protest. They also represent how Arthur's specific personal pain has been generalized into a universal symbol of discontent. He becomes empty of meaning, a vessel into which the angry populace pours their own grievances, completing his transition from man to icon. The film's sound design emphasizes subjectivity. The muffled sounds when he is dissociating, the sharp clarity of violence, the overwhelming roar of the crowd, all are filtered through Arthur's perception. This technical choice further immerses the viewer in his unstable reality, making the cinematic experience itself an exercise in navigating his fractured psyche. The final confrontation with the young Bruce Wayne in the alley is rich with doomed irony. Arthur, seeking a twisted connection with a brother, instead creates his eternal nemesis by orchestrating the trauma that will birth Batman. This moment mythologizes their relationship as one of codependency, two opposing forces born from the same rotten city and its failures. Joker ultimately stands as a profound study in the aesthetics of alienation. It meticulously constructs a world where kindness is scarce, systems are hostile, and identity is fragile. The film's enduring controversy and power stem from its refusal to offer catharsis or condemnation, instead presenting a disturbingly empathetic portrait of a man dissolving into his own pain and emerging as something else entirely, a dark mirror for a society unwilling to look at its own reflection. The film's narrative is a meticulously crafted descent, where each societal slight and personal betrayal functions as a turn of a screw, tightening the pressure on Arthur Fleck until his psyche fractures along its deepest fault lines. His initial desire for recognition is painfully human, a yearning to validate his existence through the applause of an audience, whether in a shabby comedy club or on the gleaming screen of a television broadcast. This aspiration is continually met with a world that is not merely indifferent but actively hostile, viewing his neurological condition as a provocation and his vulnerability as an invitation for cruelty. The economic decay of Gotham is viscerally felt in every frame, from the graffiti-stained walls to the mountains of uncollected garbage festering on street corners, creating a visual metaphor for the moral and social rot festering beneath the city's thin veneer of order. This environment directly informs the escalating class tension, where the wealthy elite retreat into fortified towers while the working poor are left to navigate a landscape of escalating violence and despair. Arthur exists at the very bottom of this hierarchy, a figure so marginalized he is barely considered human, a ghost haunting the city's decaying infrastructure. His pseudobulbar effect is the physical manifestation of this profound disconnect. His body literally laughs at moments of extreme distress, terror, or sadness, creating a horrific feedback loop where his pain generates a response that guarantees further misunderstanding and social exile. The condition ensures he can never communicate his internal state accurately, trapping him in a prison of misinterpretation. This biological betrayal forms the core of his alienation, making authentic connection a physiological impossibility before any psychological factors are even considered. The film's structure cleverly mirrors a perverse coming-of-age story, where the traditional milestones of identity formation, discovering one's history, asserting independence, finding a voice, are twisted into acts of violence and self-annihilation. Arthur's investigation into his parentage replaces a joyful discovery of roots with the horrific unearthing of a trauma narrative built on lies and abuse. His assertion of independence becomes the murder of his mother, the source of those lies. Finding his voice culminates not in a successful comedy routine, but in a televised monologue justifying murder. The pivotal revelation in Arkham State Hospital's records room is the narrative's point of no return. The clinical, typewritten words detailing his adoption, the head injury, and the allegations of severe neglect provide an objective truth that devastates his subjective reality. This moment is the death of Arthur Fleck as he knew himself, the person he believed he was never existed. The papers in his hands are not just medical records, but an indictment of his entire life, authored by the very systems, social services, healthcare, that were meant to protect him. Consequently, his acts of violence can be interpreted not as the eruptions of a born monster, but as the agonized, flawed attempts of a shattered person to reassemble a new identity from the pieces. Each killing represents the destruction of a specific facet of his old false life. The maternal lie, the professional betrayal, the public humiliation. In their place, he constructs the persona of the Joker, an identity with its own logic, aesthetics, and purpose, one that embraces the chaos he once feared. The film's masterstroke of having his relationship with Sophie be a fantasy is a devastating commentary on the depths of his loneliness. It reveals that his capacity for detailed, sustained delusion is a primary coping mechanism. This narrative twist forces the audience to question every previous moment of warmth or connection, retroactively coloring the film with a profound sadness. It underscores that his reality is entirely self-generated, a fragile stage play where he is both the sole actor and the entire audience. Joaquin Phoenix's physical transformation is a textbook of psychological storytelling. His emaciation speaks of a body consuming itself, a physical correlate to the mental unraveling. The choreography of his movements, the awkward, constrained gait evolving into the fluid, ecstatic dance, maps his journey from repression to expression. Even his breathing changes, shifting from shallow, anxious gasps to the deep, rhythmic breaths of someone who has, in his own mind, achieved a kind of peace. Hildur Guðnadóttir's score operates as the film's nervous system. The deep, groaning cellos and sudden, percussive strikes are not musical accompaniment, but the sonic embodiment of Arthur's shifting psychological states. The dread, the fleeting moments of fantasy, the swelling rage. Its absence in key moments is equally powerful, creating a vacuum filled by the stark, unsettling sounds of the real world, which often feels more alien to him than his internal soundscape. The film's critique of austerity politics is razor-sharp. The closure of social services is presented not as a bureaucratic footnote, but as an act of violence against the most vulnerable. His therapist's weary confession that the system doesn't care if he's unwell is a moment of stark political clarity. Arthur's journey is what happens when the social safety net is not just frayed, but deliberately cut, allowing those in need to fall into an abyss with no hope of retrieval. Visually, the contrast between the warmth of Arthur's fantasies and the coldness of his reality is starkly drawn. His imagined moments with Sophie or his triumphant stand-up routine are bathed in a golden, hopeful light and feature smoother camera movements. The real world, by contrast, is all harsh fluorescent lighting, shaky handheld shots, and oppressive, cramped compositions that visually suffocate him. The cinematography itself participates in his subjective experience. The talk show climax is the ultimate synthesis of his desires and his rage. The stage is the site of his longed-for validation, but he seizes it not for applause but for confession and confrontation. His makeup, a grotesque parody of the neat clown face he once wore, is his war paint. His movement onto the stage, a slow, dancing walk, is a performance of absolute control, a direct inversion of his earlier clumsy, apologetic demeanor. He has become the author of the spectacle. The societal reaction to his violence is a central theme of the film's second half. The wealthy and the media scramble to contextualize the subway shootings, imposing political and ideological motives onto what was, for Arthur, a personal and panicked act. This process of narrative co-option is brilliantly observed. The protesters in clown masks are not fighting for Arthur, but for their own grievances, using his image as a convenient symbol. He becomes a blank slate for projection. This raises a profound question about the nature of political movements and iconography. Can a symbol born from profound personal pathology ever be a healthy vessel for collective action? The film suggests that movements built on incoherent rage, rather than clear ideology, are inherently chaotic and destructive, mirroring the mental state of their accidental figurehead. The riot is not a revolution with a goal, but a cathartic release of undirected anger. The final scenes in the police car and the asylum cement the myth. As he smears his bloody smile across the window, watching the city burn in his name, he achieves a perverse form of transcendence. He is no longer an individual but an idea, a symbol of defiance. His calm demeanor in the asylum, culminating in the final, running footsteps, suggests this is not an end but a beginning. He has shed the last constraints of his former self. The film's philosophical underpinnings touch on nihilism and existentialism. Arthur, upon realizing his life has no inherent meaning or truthful narrative, does not succumb to despair but actively chooses to impose his own meaning through chaos. His statement, "I just don't want to feel so bad anymore," is a simplistic yet profound existential goal. He finds a way to feel powerful, to feel something, even if that something is the adrenaline of destruction and the warmth of notoriety. From a clinical perspective, while the film avoids diagnosis, Arthur displays symptoms consistent with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, stemming from prolonged childhood abuse and neglect. His dissociation, emotional dysregulation, and distorted self-concept are classic markers. His transformation into the Joker can be seen as a malignant coping strategy, a dissociative identity of sorts that allows him to compartmentalize and enact the rage that the victimized Arthur could not. The use of mirrors and reflections throughout the film is a constant visual motif highlighting his fractured identity and search for self. He practices his expressions and imagined talk show appearances in mirrors, seeking a coherent face to present to the world. In the final act, he smashes a mirror, symbolically destroying the old, reflective self and embracing the constructed persona that requires no external validation, only internal conviction. The character of Murray Franklin serves as a dark father figure. Arthur's obsession with him is rooted in a desire for paternal approval from a man who represents success, warmth, and authority. Murray's betrayal, by playing Arthur's failed comedy clip for mockery, is thus experienced as a profound paternal rejection. Killing Murray is the ultimate Oedipal act, destroying the symbolic father on live television, in front of the entire family of the audience. The film's pacing is deliberately slow and oppressive, allowing the audience to sit with Arthur's discomfort, his long hours of nothingness, his tedious routines. This temporal realism makes his eruptions of violence feel less like plot points and more like inevitable geysers of pent-up psychic pressure. We experience the tedious build-up that precedes a breakdown, making the climax feel earned rather than sensationalistic. The costume design tells its own story. Arthur's ill-fitting, drab clothing makes him blend into the gray city, a visual representation of his invisibility. The vibrant, well-tailored suit he wears as the Joker, first in his fantasy, then in reality, is a conscious act of self-creation. It is a uniform of power and identity, marking his transition from a passive entity acted upon by the world to an active agent forcing the world to look at him. The rain-soaked aesthetic of Gotham contributes to the overall feeling of dank misery. Water is often present, from the leaking ceiling in his apartment to the downpour during the riot, suggesting a world that is perpetually weeping, unable to be cleansed. Arthur's final dance on the car, hood in the rain, is a baptism into his new identity, a ceremonial washing away of Arthur Fleck. The film explores the commodification of suffering and mental illness. Arthur's painful laughter is literally broadcast for entertainment by Murray Franklin. His tragic life is later packaged and sensationalized by the news media to drive narratives about class war. His very pain becomes a product, stripped of its personal context, and used for ratings or political point scoring, further dehumanizing him. The relationship between audience and perpetrator is provocatively manipulated. The film's intimate focus forces a degree of empathy, making us witnesses to his humiliations and pain. This makes his violent acts morally complex for the viewer. We understand the catalyst even as we recoil from the action. This uncomfortable proximity is the source of much of the film's controversy and its artistic power. Thomas Wayne is portrayed not as a benevolent patriarch, but as a cold, capitalist politician. His "I'll be your father" radio address to the city rings hollow, a political soundbite that contrasts sharply with his cruel dismissal of a frightened, confused Arthur in a bathroom. He represents a paternalism that is conditional on conformity and usefulness, a system that offers platitudes instead of substantive care. The staircase Arthur ascends daily becomes a powerful symbol of his Sisyphean struggle. His initial trudges up the steps are labored, heavy, mirroring the immense effort of merely existing with his burdens. After the subway shootings, his dance down the stairs is a liberation from that weight. In the end, the stairs are seen filled with rioting clowns, transformed from a site of personal struggle into a monument to a communal uprising he inspired. The film's soundscape is meticulously crafted to induce anxiety. The constant ambient noise of the city, sirens, horns, distant shouts, creates a baseline of tension. In moments of dissociation, these sounds become muffled or are overtaken by a ringing in his ears, sonically separating him from the world. The score then bridges the gap, giving form to the formless anxiety that the diegetic sounds provoke. Arthur's journal is a window into a mind teetering on the edge. The disturbing drawings and bleak aphorisms, "I hope my death makes more sense than my life," show a creativity channeled into darkness. It is a place where his nihilistic philosophy coalesces, a rehearsal space for the manifesto he will later deliver on television. The journal is the private laboratory where the Joker is first theorized. The film questions the very nature of sanity in an insane world. Is Arthur's final embrace of chaos less sane than Thomas Wayne's belief that a city this broken can be fixed by a strongman? Is the rioter's rage less rational than the system that created the conditions for it? The film positions Arthur not as an aberration, but as a logical, if extreme, product of his environment, holding a mirror to the insanity of societal neglect and inequality. The makeup application scenes are intimate rituals. The careful, deliberate process of becoming the clown for work is a donning of a professional mask. Later, his application of the Joker makeup before the talk show is a different ceremony, aggressive, smearing, transformative. It is no longer a mask for a job, but the creation of his true face, applied with the solemnity of war paint before a battle. The theme of laughter is inverted. Public, communal laughter is consistently shown as a weapon used against him. In the comedy club, on the bus, on Murray's show. By the end, he has reclaimed laughter as his weapon. His genuine, chilling laugh in the asylum is a statement of triumph. He has turned the thing that victimized him into the core of his identity and his power, mastering the symptom that once mastered him. The film's legacy is its successful fusion of genre and high art provocation. It proved that a character from popular culture could sustain a film of uncompromising bleakness and psychological rigor, opening doors for more director-driven, standalone explorations within comic book IP. It sparked conversations about mental health, class, and media responsibility that extended far beyond typical film criticism, becoming a cultural touchstone. In its totality, Joker is a tragic symphony of failure. It is the failure of a family, a healthcare system, a social safety net, a city, and ultimately, of a man to bear the cumulative weight of those failures. Arthur Fleck's transformation is not a celebration of villainy, but a horrifying autopsy of how a soul can be eroded to nothing, leaving behind only a chaotic, grinning void. The film's enduring power lies in its uncomfortable invitation to understand the anatomy of that void, to trace the cracks in society that converge to create a monster, and to question our own role in the ecosystem that allows such fractures to deepen. The film's architectural brilliance lies in its use of Gotham not as a generic comic book backdrop, but as a precise sociological petri dish, a breeding ground for the specific alienation that germinates within Arthur Fleck. The city's pervasive grime and economic decay function as an externalization of a collective psychic wound, a visual manifestation of the neglect felt by its most vulnerable citizens. Within this ecosystem, Arthur's personal tragedy is both unique and symptomatic, his neurological disorder making him a hypersensitive receptor for the ambient cruelty of his environment. Arthur's pursuit of a career in comedy is layered with tragic irony, representing a desperate attempt to translate his profound suffering into a socially acceptable currency, laughter. His idol, Murray Franklin, embodies a world where pain is packaged into palatable anecdotes and broadcast for mass consumption, a transaction Arthur desperately wishes to join. His own failed attempts at humor, documented in his bleak journal, reveal a mind incapable of the levity required for conventional comedy, instead finding a twisted comedic truth in the absurd violence his life ultimately manifests. The film's psychological landscape is masterfully charted through a meticulous soundscape that extends beyond the renowned score. The cacophony of Gotham, the blaring car horns, the screeching subway trains, the relentless sirens, forms a constant auditory assault that mirrors Arthur's internal state of hypervigilance and anxiety. In moments of extreme stress or dissociation, these sounds distort, muffling or sharpening, sonically representing his retreat from an overwhelming external reality into the relative, if chaotic, sanctuary of his own mind. The pivotal revelation of his adoption and abuse is not just a plot twist, but the narrative's brutal pivot from a story of societal neglect to one of profound, intimate betrayal. The clinical records from Arkham provide an objective, institutional truth that obliterates the subjective, fairy tale narrative constructed by his mother. This moment forces Arthur to confront the fact that his core identity is founded on a lie authored by his primary caregiver, a realization that annihilates any remaining trust in the stability of reality or the benevolence of human connection. Following this traumatic discovery, his acts of violence can be reinterpreted as a grim, ritualistic form of self-creation. Each murder dismantles a pillar of the false reality he inhabited. His mother, the source of the foundational lie; Randall, the symbol of workplace betrayal and false friendship; and finally Murray, the paternal ideal turned public executioner. With each act, he sheds a layer of the victimized Arthur Fleck, actively forging the persona of the Joker from the raw materials of his rage and liberated nihilism. The film's profound ambiguity regarding Arthur's relationship with Sophie is its most insightful narrative mechanism concerning loneliness. The realization that their entire dynamic was an elaborate fantasy underscores the severity of his dissociation and the depth of his yearning. This narrative choice forces the audience to become detectives of his psyche, retrospectively questioning the veracity of every seemingly genuine interaction, thereby experiencing a version of the epistemological uncertainty that plagues Arthur himself. Joaquin Phoenix's embodiment of the character extends to a profound physical vocabulary. His posture evolves from a collapsed, inward-curving stance, as if trying to make himself smaller and invisible, to the loose, elongated, and sinuous movements of the Joker, occupying space with defiant theatricality. This physical transformation is a visual manifesto of his journey from repression to a terrifying, anarchic form of expression, where his body finally moves in sync with his unraveled mind. Hildur Gunnadóttir's Oscar-winning score operates as the film's emotional circulatory system. The low, groaning cellos do not merely accompany scenes, but seem to emanate from the very architecture of Gotham and the hollowed-out chest of Arthur Fleck. The music often swells in moments of internal crisis rather than external action, making the audience privy to the emotional tsunamis that precede his violent acts, binding us to his subjective experience in an almost uncomfortably intimate way. The film's political critique is nuanced, avoiding simple polemic. It illustrates how systemic failure, austerity-driven cuts to mental health services, a corrupt and brutal police force, a political elite openly contemptuous of the poor, creates the conditions for societal collapse. Arthur is the human fissure through which these pressures erupt. The protesters in clown masks are not his followers but parallel phenomena, a collective expression of the same despair that individually consumed him, revealing the difference between personalized pathology and political uprising. Cinematographer Lawrence Sher's visual strategy is one of deliberate, empathetic claustrophobia. The camera remains intimately close to Arthur, often in tight, uncomfortable close-ups that trap the viewer with him in elevators, therapy rooms, and his cramped apartment. This proximity breaks the conventional cinematic distance, making us complicit witnesses rather than detached observers. The wider shots, when they come, often emphasize his smallness and isolation within the vast, uncaring cityscape. The climactic talk show sequence represents the ultimate perversion of Arthur's original dream. The stage he once fantasized about as a site of validation becomes a platform for a terrifyingly coherent manifesto of nihilism. His preparation in the green room, applying his makeup with solemn focus, is portrayed as a warrior preparing for battle. His entrance, dancing to the sound of roaring applause he mistakes for adoration, is a tragicomic masterpiece, highlighting the fatal disconnect between his perception and the audience's anticipatory mockery. The societal reaction to his violence, the co-opting of the clown symbol by a disparate protest movement, serves as a sharp critique of modern media and political narratives. The film shows how complex individual acts are instantly flattened into simplified symbols for broader ideologies. Arthur, who seeks only personal recognition, becomes an empty icon for collective rage, a process that utterly divorces the symbol from the human reality of its origin, rendering him simultaneously powerful and utterly irrelevant to the cause he supposedly inspires. The film's final act in the police car, an asylum, interrogates the very nature of legacy and myth-making. As Arthur smears a bloody grin across the window, gazing at the city burning in a riot he catalyzed, he sees his pain magnified into a cultural force. His calm, almost serene demeanor in the asylum interview suggests a man who has achieved a twisted form of peace by fully integrating his trauma and rage into a new, cohesive identity. The final, running footsteps imply an ongoing story, an idea that has escaped containment. Philosophically, the film engages with existentialist thought, depicting a man who, upon discovering the absurdity and meaninglessness of his existence, his false history, his societal uselessness, does not choose suicide but chooses to become the author of his own meaning, however horrifying. His creation of the Joker persona is an active, willful act of self-definition in the face of a void, a commitment to living authentically according to his new, chaotic truth. From a trauma theory perspective, Arthur exhibits the classic symptoms of complex PTSD resulting from chronic childhood trauma: emotional dysregulation, a fragmented sense of self, and disturbed relationships. The Joker persona can be interpreted as a malignant, dissociative identity that emerges to hold and enact the overwhelming rage and agency that the traumatized, childlike Arthur could not possess or express, a survival mechanism that ultimately destroys what remains of his original self. The motif of performance is relentlessly explored. Arthur performs sanity for his social worker, performs cheerfulness as a clown, performs normality for his fantasy of Sophie. The film suggests that all social interaction is a form of performance, but Arthur is a catastrophically bad actor until he devises his ultimate role. The Joker is the performance that requires no mask because it has consumed the actor. It is the horrifying culmination of his lifelong desire to perform, now with a script he has written himself. The use of reflective surfaces, mirrors, glass, television screens, consistently fractures Arthur's image. He practices expressions, seeking a believable face to present. These reflections often show a man divided, unsure of which version of himself is real. The moment he smashes the bathroom mirror after his mother's hospitalization is symbolic. He is destroying the reflective surface that showed him the old, fractured Arthur, clearing the way for the self-created image he will soon paint directly onto his skin. Thomas Wayne's character is deliberately stripped of philanthropic benevolence. He is portrayed as a cold, pragmatic capitalist running for mayor on a platform of restoring order, which is explicitly framed as protecting the wealthy from the poor. His dismissal of Arthur as a clown, and his theory about jealous people wanting to tear down those more successful reveal a worldview that pathologizes poverty and mental illness, positioning him as a direct ideological antagonist to the chaos Arthur comes to represent. The film's pacing is a crucial element of its oppressive atmosphere. Long, quiet sequences of Arthur walking, dancing alone, or staring into space force the audience to inhabit his profound boredom and loneliness. This temporal realism makes the explosions of violence feel not like thrilling set pieces, but like ruptures of a simmering pressure cooker, shocking in their brutality precisely because we have been lulled into the mundane rhythm of his despair. The evolution of Arthur's wardrobe is a subtle narrative thread. His everyday clothes are drab, ill-fitting, and muted, allowing him to fade into the gray city. The vibrant, well-tailored suit he wears as the Joker, initially in his fantasy, then in reality, is a conscious aesthetic choice. It is a uniform of empowerment and a declaration of visibility, a sartorial rejection of his former invisibility and a commitment to the theatricality of his new identity. The pervasive moisture and rain in Gotham contribute to a tactile sense of decay and misery. The leaking ceiling in his apartment, the constant dampness in the streets, and the final riot in the pouring rain create a world that feels perpetually sodden and unclean. Arthur's dance on the car in the rain is therefore a kind of grotesque baptism, a ceremonial washing away of the last remnants of Arthur Fleck and a rebirth into his new anarchic self. The film scrutinizes the media's role in creating monsters. Murray Franklin's show commodifies humiliation, broadcasting Arthur's pain for laughs. Later, news outlets sensationalize his violence, framing him as a symbol of class war and driving ratings through fear. Arthur's entire journey is mediated and distorted by these platforms. He is alternately mocked and mythologized, but never understood as a human being, highlighting how modern media consumes tragedy as content. The film manipulates audience allegiance with dangerous skill. By anchoring us so deeply within Arthur's subjective experience, we viscerally feel his humiliations and share his perspective. This narrative strategy creates a profound moral unease when he commits acts of violence. We understand the origin of the rage even as we condemn its expression. This deliberate complication of viewer empathy is a primary source of the film's enduring controversy and intellectual provocation. The long staircase Arthur climbs daily transcends mere setting to become the film's most potent symbol of struggle. His initial ascents are labored, each step a physical manifestation of the effort required to survive another day. His transcendent dance down those same stairs after the subway shootings is a liberation from that weight, a moment of ecstatic release from the burden of his former life. In the end, the stairs teem with rioting clowns, transformed from a site of personal ordeal into a public monument to the uprising he inspired. Arthur's journal is a critical window into a mind decaying in real time. The disturbing, childlike drawings juxtaposed with bleak aphorisms. "I just hope my death makes more sense than my life," reveal a creative spirit channeled entirely into darkness. It is a private laboratory for his nihilistic philosophy, a rehearsal space for the jokes and justifications he will later perform publicly. The journal signifies that the Joker was being written long before he was fully born. The film poses a radical question about sanity within a pathological society. Is Arthur's embrace of chaotic meaning less rational than Thomas Wayne's belief that a city this fundamentally broken can be fixed by a strongman's order? Is the rioters' incoherent rage less sane than the economic system that impoverished them? The film positions its protagonist not as an outlier, but as a stark, logical product of a world that has abandoned empathy and compassion, holding a cracked mirror to the insanity of social indifference. The ritual of makeup application undergoes a profound transformation. The careful, precise act of applying clown makeup for his job is a donning of a professional disguise, a mask for economic survival. His application of the Joker makeup before the talk show is an entirely different ceremony, aggressive, smearing, transformative. It is no longer a mask to hide behind, but the creation and revelation of his true face, applied with the solemn purpose of a warrior preparing for a final, defining battle. The concept of laughter is systematically inverted throughout the narrative. Public, communal laughter is consistently weaponized against Arthur. On the bus, in the comedy club, on Murray's broadcast. It is a sound of exclusion and cruelty. By the film's conclusion, he reclaims laughter as his own weapon and identity. His genuine, resonant laugh in the asylum is a sound of triumph and ownership. He has mastered the symptom that once mastered him, turning the mechanism of his humiliation into the core of his power and persona. The film's enduring legacy is its successful alchemy of genre framework and art house sensibility. It demonstrated that a character from mainstream comic book mythology could sustain a film of uncompromising psychological realism and social critique, expanding the boundaries of what comic book-adjacent cinema could be. It sparked global debates that extended far beyond film criticism into sociology, political theory, and mental health advocacy, cementing its status as a contentious cultural landmark. In its meticulous totality, Joker functions as a modern tragic opera without catharsis. It is a symphony of cascading failures across every level of human organization: familial, medical, social, and political. Arthur Fleck's metamorphosis is not a celebration of anarchic freedom, but a horrifying autopsy of a soul systematically erased by neglect and betrayal, leaving only a chaotic signature in its place. The film's formidable power and discomfort stem from its unflinching invitation to trace the precise fractures in a man and his society that converge to create an icon of nihilism, compelling us to question our own proximity to the abyss we so readily condemn. The film operates as a profound meditation on the anatomy of a breaking point, meticulously documenting how institutional apathy and personal delusion conspire to create a vacuum filled by nihilistic rage. Arthur Fleck's existence is framed not as a life, but as a slow accumulation of psychic injuries, each instance of mockery or neglect layering upon the last like sediment, eventually solidifying into the foundation of a new, monstrous identity. His initial aspirations toward comedy are tragically misplaced, a fundamental misunderstanding of a world that trades only in cruelty or indifference, never in the genuine connection he seeks. Gotham City's aesthetic is one of perpetual twilight, a place where hope seems to have been systematically extracted, leaving behind a residue of neon-soaked despair and concrete fatigue. This environment is not a passive setting, but an active corrosive agent, its economic collapse and social rancor seeping into the lives of its inhabitants. Arthur, in his vulnerability and transparency, becomes a perfect vessel for this collective toxicity, absorbing the city's sickness until his own psychological boundaries dissolve entirely, allowing the internal and external chaos to become one. The neurological condition of pseudobulbar affect serves as the film's central metaphor for failed communication. It ensures Arthur's emotional state is always misread, his laughter creating a barrier of misunderstanding that makes authentic interaction impossible. This biological betrayal is the first and most fundamental violence committed against him, a pre-existing condition that guarantees his alienation before society even has a chance to reject him. His struggle is, in part, a struggle to be accurately seen, to have his internal agony recognized rather than misinterpreted as frivolity or threat. The unraveling of his personal history via the Arkham records is a narrative detonation that reshapes the entire landscape of the film. Learning he was not only adopted but violently abused by the very person who crafted his foundational myth dismantles any remaining architecture of self. This revelation retroactively colors every aspect of his life, his illness, his isolation, his yearning for a father, as symptoms of a concealed trauma. The truth does not set him free. It annihilates the prison of his old identity, leaving him in a formless void from which the Joker must be built. His subsequent violence, therefore, can be interpreted as a grim and literal form of world-building. Each murder is a deliberate act of demolition, clearing away the key figures of the false narrative he once inhabited. With the destruction of his mother, his false co-worker friend, and his idol-turned-tormentor, he erases the supporting cast of Arthur Fleck. In their place, he constructs a new reality with its own rules, where the only consistent truths are pain and the liberating power of embracing chaos as a first principle. The brilliant narrative device of the Sophie fantasy forces a crucial epistemological crisis upon the viewer. This revelation does more than expose his loneliness. It fundamentally challenges the reliability of the cinematic reality we have been shown. We are thrust into the position of having to constantly evaluate what is objective diegesis and what is Arthur's desperate projection, mirroring his own struggle to distinguish between the two. This technique builds a profound, unsettling empathy, as we are made to experience the fragility of his grasp on the real. Joaquin Phoenix's performance is a masterclass in physicalizing psychological disintegration. His body is a map of suffering. The protruding spine, the gaunt face, the eyes that shift from watery pleading to focused, sinister intensity. The transformation is most evident in his movement vocabulary. The initial, hunched shuffle that seems to apologize for taking up space evolving into the languid, predatory grace of the Joker's dance, a body finally comfortable in its own malicious intent. Hildur Gunnadóttir's score is the voice of Arthur's subconscious. Its groaning, droning textures and sudden, shivering high notes do not comment on the action, but emanate from the core of his being. The music often swells in moments of silent turmoil, giving auditory shape to the emotional avalanches that happen internally before they manifest externally. It binds the audience to his inner life with an almost visceral intimacy, making us feel the pressure building behind his eyes. The film's political intelligence lies in its depiction of a feedback loop between systemic neglect and social unrest. The austerity that cuts Arthur's therapy, the police brutality on display, the corrupt political rhetoric. These are not background details but active engines of destabilization. Arthur is the human spark, but Gotham is the tinder, dried out by years of indifference and economic cruelty. The riot is not a revolution with a program, but a reflexive spasm of a body politic in acute distress, with Arthur's clown face becoming its meaningless yet potent banner. Cinematographically, the film employs a language of entrapment and release. The majority of the film uses tight, handheld shots and claustrophobic compositions, boxing Arthur in with his misery. When visual release comes, it is often tied to his fantasies or his transformation. The wider, more stable shots of his imagined success, or the sweeping, operatic view of the riot from the crashed police car. The camera itself seems to breathe a sigh of terrible relief when he embraces his new identity, finding a perverse beauty in the chaos. The talk show culmination is the perfect perversion of the American dream of fame and validation. Arthur enters believing, in his fractured way, that he is finally being seen on his terms. His calm, articulate monologue is the most coherent and powerful performance of his life, but its content is a rejection of the very society that stage represents. He murders the host not in a blind rage, but as the logical conclusion of his argument, turning a platform of entertainment into a theater of ideological assassination. The public's adoption of the clown symbol following the subway shootings is a razor-sharp satire on the speed and superficiality of modern iconography. The protesters have no knowledge of Arthur's pain, his condition, or his motives. They see only an act of violence against the wealthy and co-opt its aesthetic for their own heterogeneous grievances. This process completely divorces the symbol from the human reality of its origin, illustrating how personal trauma can be vacuumed up and repurposed by the anarchic energy of a mob, becoming depersonalized and potent in equal measure. The concluding sequences purposefully blend myth and man. In the back of the police car, watching his image ignite a city, Arthur achieves a kind of sublime artistic completion. His blood-painted smile on the window is his final masterpiece, a signature on the chaos. The asylum scene then allows for ambiguity. Is his laughter a sign of madness or the contentment of an artist satisfied with his work? The echoing footsteps suggest the idea is now loose, forever separate from the frail man who first conceived it. Existentially, Arthur's journey is from passive suffering to active, willful absurdism. Upon discovering that his life has no inherent meaning or truth, he does not lapse into despair but actively constructs a new, personal meaning centered on the virtue of chaos. He becomes the author of his own narrative, however horrific, rejecting the world's tragic script for one of his own design, where he is no longer the pathetic punchline, but the one delivering the fatal joke. Through the lens of trauma theory, the Joker persona can be diagnosed as a severe dissociative coping mechanism. The chronic, childhood complex trauma fractured Arthur's personality. The Joker is an alter identity that emerges to hold the rage, agency, and grandiosity that the fragile, abused Arthur ego state could not contain or express. This is not heroism, but a catastrophic psychological adaptation, a survival strategy that ensures psychic continuity at the cost of humanity. The theme of performance is examined to its most nihilistic conclusion. The film suggests all social life is a performance of roles: son, employee, suitor, citizen. Arthur fails at all these roles because he cannot master the scripts. The Joker is his ultimate, successful performance precisely because he writes the script himself, a role that requires no masking because it has fully consumed the actor beneath. His authenticity is found in the total commitment to this fictional, chaotic self. Mirrors and reflections are used not just as clichés of duality, but as instruments of painful self-confrontation. Arthur uses them to practice being a person, to rehearse smiles and expressions that never quite connect. They show him the disconnect between his internal feeling and his external presentation. His destruction of the mirror is a symbolic rejection of this lifelong project of trying to reflect an acceptable image, choosing instead to paint his own truth directly onto his flesh. Thomas Wayne is deliberately crafted as an anti-benevolent figure. He is a billionaire politician whose solution to the city's pain is a call for order, an order that clearly serves to protect his class. His characterization critiques a certain kind of paternalistic capitalism that views social problems as issues of morale or criminality rather than systemic failure. His cold dismissal of Arthur is the final proof that no salvation will come from the institutions of power, only further contempt. The film's deliberate, meditative pacing is essential to its psychological impact. Long, quiet stretches of Arthur alone in his apartment or walking the streets force the audience to marinate in the emptiness of his existence. This makes the violent eruptions not entertaining, but horrifyingly inevitable, the logical outlet for energies with nowhere else to go. The pacing replicates the experience of depression and stagnation, making the climax feel like a terrifying relief of pressure. Costume design provides a subtle arc from invisibility to spectacle. Arthur's everyday clothes are shades of gray and brown, designed to help him disappear into the urban gloom. The vibrant, magenta-suited Joker is a deliberate visual shout. It is the clothing of a performer, a celebrity, a man who demands to be seen. The suit is his armor and his flag, signifying his transition from a man who was looked through to one who cannot be looked away from. The omnipresent dampness and water in Gotham create a tactile sense of malaise. Everything is slightly rotten, mildewed, or leaking. This isn't the dramatic rain of noir, but a persistent, degrading damp that seeps into bones and morals alike. Arthur's final dance in the rain is therefore a purification ritual of sorts, a baptism into a new faith where the only sacrament is acknowledging the world's inherent, ugly absurdity. The film offers a scathing critique of media ecology. Murray's show exemplifies how television turns human suffering into consumable content for mass diversion. The news media then packages Arthur's violence into simplistic narratives of class warfare, fueling panic and ratings. In both cases, Arthur's humanity is erased. He is either a laughingstock or a symbol, but never a complex person. The film shows how media systems are inherently dehumanizing, stripping context for the sake of narrative or profit. The film's manipulation of point of view is its most provocative technique. By anchoring us so deeply within Arthur's subjective and unreliable perspective, it implicates us in his logic. We feel the sting of his humiliations and understand the genesis of his rage. This creates profound moral discomfort, challenging the viewer to hold two contradictory truths. Understanding a motive is not the same as endorsing an action, and empathy can be a dangerously expansive faculty. The iconic staircase is a symbol that evolves with the narrative. It begins as a site of Sisyphean labor, each ascent a metaphor for the unbearable daily grind of his life. His ecstatic dance descent is the film's central image of catharsis and transformation, the moment he chooses to roll the boulder of his rage back down upon the world. By the end, populated by rioting clowns, the stairs become a public stage, a monument to how a personal symbol can be appropriated for collective catharsis. Arthur's journal is the fossil record of a collapsing mind. Its disturbing sketches and nihilistic one-liners are not the ramblings of a born killer, but the artistic outpouring of a deeply wounded, creative spirit with no healthy outlet. It is the private incubator for the Joker's philosophy, showing that his violent persona was intellectually and artistically crafted over time. Not a sudden psychotic break, but a conscious, albeit warped, creative project. The film poses a radical, unsettling question about the sanity of social structures themselves. Is a society that abandons its sick, mocks its vulnerable, and protects only its wealthy truly sane? In this context, Arthur's embrace of chaos appears less as madness and more as a coherent, logical response to an insane environment. He becomes a dark prophet who recognizes the void at the heart of the social contract and chooses to dance in it rather than pretend it isn't there. The ritual of applying makeup evolves from a daily chore to a sacred act. The careful clown makeup for work is a uniform, a disguise for economic survival. The smeared, haphazard application of the Joker's makeup is an act of revelation and creation. He is not covering his face but revealing his true one, using cosmetics not to hide but to manifest his inner reality onto his skin. It is the final, definitive step in his journey from being an object acted upon to being the author of his own image. Laughter undergoes a complete transvaluation. Initially, it is the sound of his humiliation, a symptom that isolates him. Through his transformation, he reclaims it. By the end, his laughter is authentic, powerful, and weaponized. It is no longer a reaction but a statement. He has taken the very mechanism of his torment and made it the cornerstone of his identity and power, achieving a terrible mastery over the thing that once defined his powerlessness. The film's cultural legacy is that of a successful, high-stakes aesthetic gamble. It proved that a populist genre could be a vessel for a grim, psychologically complex, and politically charged character study, bridging the gap between multiplex and art house. The intense debates it sparked, about incel culture, societal responsibility, and the representation of mental illness, demonstrate its power as a cultural Rorschach test, revealing the anxieties of the era in which it was received. Ultimately, Joker is a tragedy of failed containment. It chronicles the catastrophic result when every system designed to contain human suffering, family, medicine, social work, policing, fails simultaneously. Arthur Fleck is not a demon rising from the depths, but a man crumbling into the abyss that opens beneath him when those structures give way. The film's unsettling genius is in making us witness that crumbling in intimate detail, forcing us to contemplate the thin, often institutional, line that separates a patient from a monster, and to question what we see reflected in his final, terrifying grin. The film's narrative is constructed as a series of concentric circles of failure, each layer of institutional and personal neglect reinforcing the next until the center, Arthur Fleck, simply collapses into a void. His pursuit of stand-up comedy is not a genuine vocation, but a tragically misplaced belief in a cultural script that promises validation through performance, a script he is neurologically and socially unequipped to follow. This fundamental mismatch between his inner life and the world's expectations is the engine of his suffering, a constant friction that generates the heat of his eventual rage. Gotham City is rendered not just as a setting but as a character in a state of advanced decay, its very atmosphere thick with resentment and impending chaos. The visual design, evoking the New York of the late 1970s, is a masterclass in creating a tactile sense of decline, where every street corner feels slick with moral grime and the promise of violence. Arthur exists within this ecosystem as its most sensitive organism, absorbing its toxins until his own psychological immune system fails completely, allowing the pathology of the city and the man to become indistinguishable. His pseudobulbar effect is the cruelest of ironies, a condition that forces his body to perform joy while his soul experiences despair, making him a living spectacle of misinterpretation. This neurological disorder ensures that his most vulnerable moments are publicly framed as jokes or threats, guaranteeing his isolation. It represents the ultimate failure of communication, where the body's signals are fundamentally at odds with the mind's reality, creating a permanent state of existential dissonance that no amount of therapy or medication can fully reconcile. The shattering of his familial myth via the Arkham records is the single most destructive event in his life, a psychological earthquake that levels the already fragile landscape of his identity. Discovering he was a victim of severe abuse reframes his entire existence as a lie curated by his abuser. This revelation does not provide clarity, but instead plunges him into a formless nihilism, stripping away the last narratives that gave his suffering a semblance of meaning and leaving him in a freefall where the only remaining truth is the fact of his own pain. In this void, his violent acts become a perverse form of existential artistry. Each murder is a deliberate, sculptural removal of a piece of the world that lied to him or betrayed him. He is not lashing out randomly, but engaging in a systematic deconstruction of the social contract as he experienced it. The creation of the Joker persona is the subsequent constructive phase, building a new self from the rubble, a self whose core philosophy is the embrace of chaos as the only honest response to a hypocritical and absurd world. The brilliant revelation of the Sophie fantasy is the film's most insightful narrative mechanism regarding the architecture of loneliness. It demonstrates that Arthur's mind is capable of generating entire, sustained fictional relationships to compensate for a devastating lack of real human connection. This forces the audience into a position of retrospective reinterpretation, undermining our own sense of narrative security and making us complicit in the uncertainty that defines his reality, thereby deepening our uncomfortable empathy. Joaquin Phoenix's physical commitment transcends acting to become a form of metaphysical transformation. His body is a canvas of suffering, with every protruding bone and sinew telling a story of neglect and self-starvation. The evolution of his movement, from the constricted, apologetic gestures of Arthur to the fluid, almost ecstatic dance of the Joker, charts a journey from a body at war with itself to a body that has become a unified instrument of its owner's will, however malign that will may be. Hildur Guðnadóttir's score functions as the film's emotional weather system, a low-pressure front of droning cellos and trembling strings that forecasts the internal storms within Arthur. It is less a musical accompaniment and more a direct transmission from his subconscious, often swelling in moments of silent contemplation or impending violence, giving audible shape to the turmoil that words or actions cannot yet express. It binds the viewer to Arthur's interiority with an inescapable, somatic grip. The film's political critique is sophisticated in its cause and effect clarity. It meticulously charts how macro-level policy, austerity budgets that defund mental health services, a police force that brutalizes protesters, a political elite that demonizes the poor, creates the micro-level conditions for individual catastrophe. Arthur is not a political revolutionary but a human symptom. His violent outburst is the fever spike of a sick society, and the clown mask riots are the resulting contagion spreading through the body politic. Cinematographer Lawrence Sher employs a visual language of entrapment that gradually gives way to a spectacle of release. The early and middle sections of the film are dominated by tight, shaky close-ups and confining midshots, visually boxing Arthur into his cramped life. As he transforms, the frame occasionally opens up, particularly in his fantasies and in the riot sequence, using wider, more stable compositions that ironically mirror his sense of liberation through chaos, finding a horrifying grandeur in the collapse of order. The talk show climax represents the ultimate inversion of the American dream narrative. Arthur ascends the stage not as a success story, but as its antithesis, a refutation of every value the show represents: meritocracy, civility, and the redemptive power of fame. His calm, chillingly articulate monologue is his true stand-up routine, and the murder of Murray is its punchline. He successfully commands the audience's absolute attention, but he uses it to declare the emptiness of their shared social reality, turning a temple of entertainment into a theater of ideological murder. The public's adoption of the clown mask following the subway shootings is a pointed satire on the speed of symbolic appropriation in the digital age. The protesters have no knowledge of Arthur's internal torment. They see only an act of violence against a hated class and graft their own grievances onto its aesthetic. This process utterly severs the symbol from its human source, illustrating how personal trauma can be vacuumed into the vortex of collective rage and transformed into an empty yet potent signifier for any and all discontent. The film's denouement deliberately merges man into myth. In the back of the police cruiser, Arthur views the riot not with panic, but with the awe of an artist observing the impact of his work. His bloody handprint on the window is his final signature. The asylum scenes then cultivate profound ambiguity. Is his laughter the sound of madness, or the contentment of a creator who has successfully externalized his inner chaos? The echoing footsteps suggest the idea has escaped its creator, destined to be reinterpreted endlessly. From an existentialist viewpoint, Arthur's arc is from passive victim to active agent provocateur of the absurd. Upon discovering the fundamental meaninglessness of his prescribed identity and social role, he does not choose inaction, but instead chooses to become the author of his own chaotic meaning. He embraces the role of the Joker not as a mask, but as an authentic commitment to living in accordance with the truth of life's inherent absurdity and cruelty, a truth he believes society cowardly disguises. Through a clinical lens, the Joker persona can be understood as a severe dissociative identity state born from complex trauma. The chronic abuse and neglect fractured Arthur's ego. The Joker is an emergent identity that holds the aggression, grandiosity, and agency that the fragile, traumatized Arthur self could not integrate. This is not a superhero origin, but a psychological catastrophe, a survival mechanism that preserves a sense of power and control at the cost of psychic integration and any remaining capacity for empathy. The motif of performance is examined to its most nihilistic extreme. The film posits that social identity is inherently performative. We play roles like son, worker, citizen. Arthur fails at these performances because he cannot master their inauthentic scripts. The Joker is his triumphant performance precisely because he authors the script himself. It is a role that requires no dissociation between actor and character because the character has consumed the actor entirely. His liberation is found in the total commitment to this authentic inauthenticity. Mirrors and reflective surfaces serve as sites of painful confrontation and disintegration. Arthur uses them to rehearse being a normal person, to practice smiles that never reach his eyes. They reflect back a self that feels alien to him. His violent destruction of the mirror is a symbolic rejection of this lifelong project of reflection and assimilation. He chooses instead to paint his own reality directly onto his visage, opting for a created image over a reflected one. Thomas Wayne is characterized with deliberate, anti-philanthropic ambiguity. He is a billionaire mayoral candidate whose platform is order, a clear euphemism for protecting capital from the unrest of the impoverished. His portrayal critiques a paternalistic capitalism that pathologizes poverty and views social ills as failures of individual morality or criminality. His cold interaction with Arthur is the final proof that no salvation will come from the institutions at the top of the social hierarchy, only further marginalization. The film's deliberate, languid pacing is essential to its psychological realism. Long, quiet sequences of Arthur traversing the city or sitting alone force the audience to inhabit the crushing boredom and emptiness of his existence. This makes the eruptions of violence feel not like thrilling plot points, but like terrifying, inevitable ruptures, the only possible outlet for energies with no other channel. The pacing mirrors the experience of depression, making the final riot feel like a catastrophic release of pent-up societal pressure. The costume design narrates a silent story of emergence. Arthur's everyday wardrobe is a palette of grays and browns, designed for invisibility within the urban decay. The vibrant, tailored suit of the Joker is a deliberate sartorial shout. It is the uniform of a performer who demands a spotlight, a flag of defiance. This clothing marks his transition from a man who is socially transparent to one who is optically and symbolically indelible, a figure impossible to ignore. The persistent dampness and aqueous imagery in Gotham create a palpable sense of microbial decay. The city isn't just dirty, it is sodden, suggesting a rot that has penetrated to the structural level. Leaking ceilings, wet streets, and the final riot in the rain contribute to an atmosphere of pervasive, inescapable mildew. Arthur's dance in the rain is thus a perverse baptism, a ceremonial washing in the truth of the world's filth, an embrace of the corrosive element as his natural medium. The film delivers a scalding critique of media as a dehumanizing machine. Murray Franklin's show exemplifies entertainment media that commodifies humiliation, turning personal failure into mass consumption content. The news media then packages Arthur's violence into simplistic, politicized narratives to fuel outrage and ratings. In both cases, Arthur's complex humanity is erased. He is either a joke or a symbol, but never a person. The film argues that these media systems are inherently incapable of processing human complexity, reducing it to caricature. The film's masterful manipulation of perspective is its primary source of provocation. By anchoring us so firmly within Arthur's subjective and unreliable consciousness, it forces us to experience the logic of his grievances. We feel the sting of each humiliation and understand the genesis of his rage. This creates a profound ethical challenge for the viewer, demanding we hold two contradictory truths simultaneously. Comprehension is not condonation, and empathy can be a perilously expansive faculty that leads us into moral gray zones. The iconic staircase is a symbol that undergoes a complete narrative metamorphosis. Initially, it is a site of Sisyphean labor, each climb a metaphor for the unbearable daily grind of a life going nowhere. His transcendent dance descent is the film's central image of catharsis and rebirth, the moment he chooses to let the boulder of his anguish roll back down upon the world. By the climax, teeming with rioting clowns, the stairs become a public amphitheater, demonstrating how a private symbol of struggle can be appropriated as a stage for collective uprising. Arthur's journal is the archaeological record of a collapsing psyche. Its grotesque drawings and bleak aphorisms are not the scribblings of a born killer, but the artistic output of a wounded, imaginative spirit with no healthy conduit. It is the private workshop where the Joker's philosophy is forged, proving that his violent persona was intellectually and creatively constructed over time. A conscious, albeit deeply disturbed, artistic and philosophical project, not a mere psychotic episode. The film asks a radical, unsettling question about societal sanity. Is a culture that systematically abandons its sick, mocks its vulnerable, and protects only its wealth truly sane, or healthy? In this context, Arthur's embrace of chaos appears less as individual madness and more as a coherent, logical response to a profoundly disordered environment. He becomes a dark prophet who recognizes the void at the heart of the social contract and chooses to dance in it, rejecting the collective pretense that it does not exist. The ritual of makeup application evolves from daily obligation to sacred rite. The precise clown makeup for his job is a defensive uniform, a mask for economic survival. The smeared, expressive application of the Joker's makeup is an act of revelation and creation. He is not concealing his face, but manifesting his inner truth onto his skin. It is the definitive, final step in his metamorphosis from a passive object, shaped by external forces, to an active subject who paints his own reality onto the canvas of his body. Laughter undergoes a complete transvaluation of values. Initially, it is the sound of his humiliation, a neurological symptom that guarantees his ostracism. Through his transformation, he reclaims it as his own. By the end, his laughter is authentic, powerful, and declarative. It is no longer a reactive symptom, but a proactive statement of identity. He has taken the very mechanism of his torture and forged it into the cornerstone of his power, achieving a terrible form of mastery over the source of his lifelong pain. The film's cultural impact is that of a high-wire act that redefined genre boundaries. It demonstrated that a comic book property could be a vessel for a grim, psychologically nuanced, and politically incisive character study, successfully bridging the gap between blockbuster and art house cinema. The fervent debates it ignited, covering topics from toxic masculinity and incel culture to societal responsibility and mental health stigma, prove its potency as a cultural mirror, reflecting the deepest anxieties of its time. In its final assessment, Joker is a meticulous tragedy of systemic and psychic collapse. It documents the catastrophic consequence when every structure meant to support and contain human fragility, family, medicine, social work, economic justice, fails in concert. Arthur Fleck is not a monster ascending from darkness, but a man dissolving into the void that opens when those structures crumble beneath him. The film's unsettling power resides in making us intimate witnesses to that dissolution, compelling us to confront the fragile, often institutional, barriers that separate a patient from a persona, and to question what we recognize in the reflection of his final, defiant, and terrifying smile. The film meticulously constructs a worldview where empathy has been eradicated by economic decay and social Darwinism, positioning Arthur Fleck as the ultimate casualty of this emotional austerity. His longing for connection is repeatedly pathologized or monetized, leaving him with no vocabulary for his pain except the one he eventually invents through violence. The stand-up comedy dream is particularly cruel, a cultural mirage that promises catharsis and community, but in reality, offers only a gladiatorial arena where his vulnerability is the main event for public ridicule. Gotham operates as a late capitalist dystopia where the social contract has not just frayed but been publicly shredded, its remnants blowing through trash-choked streets like forgotten ordinances. This isn't a city on the brink. It is a city in a state of advanced, normalized collapse, where the wealthy have seceded into towers of glass, and the poor are left to negotiate a landscape of perpetual threat. Arthur exists in the interstitial spaces of this divided city, a spectral figure haunting subways and alleyways, his very presence a mute accusation against the system that produced him. The pseudo-bulbar effect serves as a perfect biological metaphor for the film's themes of misinterpretation and performativity. It forces Arthur's body to perform a pantomime of joy regardless of his internal state, making him a living example of the disconnect between authentic feeling and social presentation. This condition ensures his interior life remains perpetually inaccessible, locked behind a grin he cannot control, transforming him into a walking paradox. A man screaming in agony who can only audibly laugh. The demolition of his personal history in the Arkham Files room is an act of psychological annihilation. The typewritten words detailing his adoption and abuse do not provide answers, but rather erase the questions that gave his life a shaky structure. This revelation incinerates the narrative of Arthur Fleck, leaving behind only the raw, exposed nerve of trauma. He is not liberated by the truth. He is unmade by it, forced to confront the horrifying vacancy where a self should be, a vacancy he will fill with the grand, destructive fiction of the Joker. Consequently, his murders are not crimes of passion in a traditional sense, but acts of metaphysical editing. He is cutting away the false characters in the story of his life, the lying mother, the betraying colleague, the mocking father figure. Each act is a surgical strike against a specific source of his ontological humiliation. The birth of the Joker is the writing of a new protagonist for this revised narrative, one who embraces the chaos of a plotless existence and authors his own shocking twists. The Sophie subplot's reveal as fantasy is the film's most devastating commentary on the mechanics of loneliness. It shows that Arthur's mind has become a factory for producing counterfeit intimacy, a defense mechanism so sophisticated it can generate entire relationships complete with dialogue and remembered touches. This forces the audience to become tragic epistemologists, doubting the reality of every prior moment of warmth. And in doing so, we experience a fraction of the pervasive uncertainty that is his constant reality. Joaquin Phoenix's embodiment is a study in the physical grammar of distress. His body is a landscape of angles and hollows, a testament to a metabolism feeding on despair. The transformation is choreographed in minute muscular shifts. The tight, pained shoulders of Arthur loosen into the rolling, confident gait of the Joker. His eyes change from wells of pleading confusion to focused points of sinister certainty. It is a performance that happens as much in the silent language of the body as in the delivery of lines. Hildur Guðnadóttir's score is the sound of a soul corroding. Its deep, resonant frequencies feel less like music and more like the ambient pressure of a depressive episode given sonic form. It doesn't highlight emotions. It is the emotion itself, a dense, unavoidable atmosphere of dread that seeps into every scene. The score's genius is in its refusal to sensationalize, instead providing a consistent, throbbing baseline of anguish that makes Arthur's world feel viscerally, inescapably real. The film's political statement is one of corrosive causality. It visually and narratively links the policy decisions made in gleaming boardrooms, the cutting of social programs, to the human wreckage on the streets. Arthur is that wreckage personified. He is not a political actor but a political consequence, a living indictment. The clown mask riots are not an ideological movement, but a collective immune response, a fevered dream of the body politic attempting to burn out the infection of its own neglect through indiscriminate violence. The cinematography evolves from a language of surveillance to one of spectacle. Early scenes often employ a shaky, handheld aesthetic, as if observing Arthur from a distance or through a security camera, emphasizing his status as a specimen. As he claims his agency, the camera becomes more stable, more composed, even theatrical, particularly during his talk show entrance and the riot, framing him as the star of his own grand, horrific production. The visual style itself capitulates to his newfound power. Murray Franklin's talk show represents the glittering apex of a hollow culture industry, a machine designed to turn human experience into consumable, sanitized content. Arthur's invasion of this space is not just a physical attack, but an ideological contamination. He uses the language of confession and entertainment to deliver a manifesto of nihilism, hijacking the machinery of celebrity to announce the death of its values. His murder of Murray is the logical endpoint of his critique, a rejection of the paternalistic voice of authority that speaks in soothing platitudes. The appropriation of the clown symbol by the mob is a brilliant dissection of symbol formation in the age of social chaos. The protesters have no interest in Arthur's pathology. They see only an act that disrupts the established order and adopt its most visible signifier. This process reveals how symbols are emptied of their original, complex meaning and refilled with generalized rage. Arthur's deeply personal revolt becomes a public brand, a logo for discontent, demonstrating how individual tragedy is subsumed by the anarchic energy of collective grievance. The film's conclusion masterfully blends the man into the myth, leaving the two inextricably fused. In the police car, Arthur observes the city in flames with the detached awe of a playwright watching his debut. The bloody smile on the window is his authorial mark. The asylum scenes deepen the ambiguity. His laughter and the final chase down the corridor could be the triumph of madness or the birth of a legend. The echoing footsteps are the sound of the idea escaping the man, destined to live on as a story, a warning, and an inspiration. Through an existential lens, Arthur's journey is a perverse version of self-actualization. He moves from being a passive object, defined by his illness and his circumstances, to an active subject who defines himself through a radical, terrifying act of will. He chooses the identity of the Joker, embracing absurdity not with despair, but with a kind of joyous, malignant creativity. He becomes the artist of his own destruction and the destruction around him, finding meaning in the act of demolition itself. A trauma-informed reading sees the Joker persona as a pathological but functional dissociative identity. The severe, chronic trauma of Arthur's childhood necessitated a psychological split. The Joker, Alter, is not a separate personality, but a dissociated self-state that holds the traumatic memories, the rage, and the agency that the fragile Arthur self-state could not integrate. This is a survival strategy gone horrifically awry, a way to continue existing when the core self has been shattered beyond repair. The film's exploration of performance extends to a critique of identity itself. It suggests that in a society where value is performative, based on success, charm, productivity, those who cannot perform convincingly are rendered non-persons. Arthur's failure to perform normality is his original sin. The Joker is his ultimate, successful performance precisely because it is a performance of failure, of rejection, of antisocial truth. He masters the system by excelling at representing its antithesis. Mirrors and reflections are employed as instruments of existential torture. Arthur gazes into them seeking a coherent self, but they reflect only a stranger wearing a mask of pain. They highlight the chasm between his internal experience and his external image. When he destroys the mirror, he is not destroying his reflection but destroying the hope of ever seeing a true self there. He opts instead for a created image, one drawn from the inside out, a declaration that he will no longer seek validation from reflective surfaces. Thomas Wayne is characterized as the face of a vicious, paternalistic neoliberalism. His rhetoric of cleaning up the city and offering himself as a father figure is exposed as a thinly veiled justification for cracking down on the poor. He represents a system that offers bootstrap platitudes while actively dismantling the supports one might use to pull themselves up. His final, violent confrontation with Arthur is the inevitable clash between the enforcer of a brutal order and the human cost of that order's maintenance. The film's deliberate, oppressive pacing is a narrative strategy of immersion. It forces the viewer to dwell in the elongated, uneventful stretches of Arthur's life, to feel the weight of empty minutes and unfulfilled hours. This temporal realism makes the violent eruptions feel less like plot developments and more like geysers of pent-up psychic force, shocking in their brutality precisely because they rupture such a convincingly rendered state of stagnant normalcy. Costume design articulates a journey from erasure to hypervisibility. Arthur's civilian clothes are shades of urban camouflage, meant to help him disappear into the background noise of the city. The Joker's suit is a violent eruption of color, a deliberate assault on the senses. It is the clothing of someone who demands to be perceived, a statement that he will no longer participate in his own invisibility. The suit becomes synonymous with the persona, a second skin of defiant theatricality. The omnipresent water and dampness in Gotham symbolize a corruption that cannot be cleansed. It is not cathartic rain, but a persistent, leaking moisture that suggests foundational rot. Everything is perpetually wet, stained, and mildewed, from Arthur's apartment ceiling to the city streets. His final dance in the rain is therefore not a cleansing but a communion. He is joining himself with the corrupt element, baptizing himself in the city's essential, decaying nature. The film presents a damning portrait of media as an apparatus of alienation. Murray's show transforms private failure into public spectacle, while the news media reduces complex social breakdown to sensationalized narratives of clown versus rich. In both cases, Arthur is processed, stripped of his humanity, and converted into content, either for laughter or for fear. The film argues that these media forms are incapable of conveying truth. They can only produce commodified distortions that further alienate individuals from each other and from reality.